Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and a couple weeks back I did a video on a segment from the infamous film Holy Mountain, and it got pulled. It got pulled twice. I tried to edit it, I tried to slow it down, I tried to speed it up, but it kept getting the copyright claim, and it got basically relegated to just Twitter. But Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis and Esoteric Hollywood hit me up on Twitter, and he said, I'm about to do a review on this. We should get together. And I thought, absolutely, that is something that we need to do because there's so much going on in this film. I was always wondering what other interpretations would be, especially those that have studied the occult much more than myself. So before we go to Jay and get in depth on this very, 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 very occultic, bizarre, surreal experience, I want to remind everybody, I'm fully demonetized on this platform. So's Jay, by the way. We do this with your support. That's why we've got the GoFundMe, $5, $10, $15. It means the world to me. You can, by the way, check out all of Jay's stuff over at jaysanalysis.com and make sure to follow him over at Twitter as well, at Jay underscore, what is that, D007? It is my pleasure to now welcome you, Mr. Jay Dyer. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend.
Well, thank you, Jason. It's an honor to talk to you. I remember back in about 2003 or 4, I remember watching clips of Loose Change, and that woke me to the Big 9 event. So I'm glad to talk to you.
Awesome, brother. Well, how do you get involved in this? Because I know that you start off in academics, and then you obviously take an interest into esoteric knowledge, into the occult, and then really into how it bleeds into modern day society, and especially into modern day propaganda, Hollywood, entertainment, the music industry, and popular culture.
Good question. I was a big book guy. My mom was a librarian and an editor, so I had a lot of books around, and by the time I was 18, 19, I would just go collect books, and I got some that dealt with the United Nations and Blavatsky and Theosophy and that kind of stuff. So I knew that there was a kind of a broader UN conspiracy thing going on when I was about 18 or 19. And then a few years later, like I said, I watched some of your stuff. I watched some stuff from Alex. I watched other, truthers, and that sent me further down the rabbit hole. And at the same time, I was studying film in college and philosophy. So I chose two kind of weird, what you would think would be disconnected disciplines. But the more that I studied film, propaganda, Hollywood, the more I saw they were connected. And as you know, with something like the Big 9 event, there's a lot of espionage and intelligence stuff in the background. So I had all that in my mind, and the more that I read about Hollywood and the history of Hollywood and the history of different films and studios and even A-list, B-list actors, the more I found out, man, a lot of these people are working for and with intelligence agencies. They're spies on the side. They're ratting out their friends. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. So it just eventually became a big tent of seeing a unified view of all this stuff. And like you said, I'm kind of embarrassed because I covered this stuff for a long time, and I never got to Holy Mountain. And I had people for years saying, please cover this movie, do this one, do this one, do this. And I just forgot about it. And so I was literally, my fiance was like, let's do Holy Mountain. I said, all right, we'll finally do it. And like the day after that, I saw you saying you were going to cover it. I said, we need to talk.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I even really delve into the film, why it caught my attention, the symbolism, at least I was able to decode, because I came across this film all the way back in 2009 when I was working on Invisible Empire at InfoWars. And, I was big on the torrent scene, and I was looking at all these releases, and I saw this one that kind of caught my eye. And immediately, when I saw the all-seeing eye symbolism that's prevalent throughout the movie, and especially in the beginning, and the black and white symbolism that's very apparent in Masonic culture, the pillars, all these different scenes, I'm like, what am I watching? The next thing I thought to myself as I'm watching this, and I'm 15 minutes into it, and we're now in the scene where they're in the city and the sets become more elaborate, is where in the fuck did they get the budget for this? And you find out that it is the most expensive foreign film of its time up until that point, that it's produced by Alan Klein, the producer of the Beatles, and it caught the attention of not only John Lennon, but George Harrison, who was actually going to play the fool. Really, you could say that that's the lead character, other than perhaps Jodorowsky himself, but he was uncomfortable with the nudity, especially the scene in the tub that is one of the very grotesque and graphic sexual scenes of this film. So, you know, when you finally get to this, because I'm sure, especially in your line of work, people are hitting you up, what are your first impressions?
I tried watching it many years ago, probably around the same time that you were talking about seeing it on torrents, and I could not get through it. I mean, I think there's kind of a stages of research and stuff that you have to go down before you're ready for certain things. So when I tried to watch this back 10 years ago, I just was like, this is like a bunch of symbolic gibberish. I can't make heads or tail of it. But I needed to read a lot more and grasp a lot more. Not that I'm saying I think this film is great, so to speak. I have, there's aspects of it I appreciate, and aspects of it I think are pretty disgusting, nasty. But my initial impression is that this is a kind of just a psychological, alchemical journey. It's the process of how one goes through enlightenment or an awakening, or whatever terms you want to use, to come to the higher ultimate truths, right? And given that Jodorowsky, and I'm gonna spoil everything, he says he's a atheistic mystic or an atheistic Luciferian. He uses some terminology like that. That really makes sense when you watch this film. If you've seen the ending and you know how it ends. I don't want to get too ahead of myself, but yeah, that's my initial impression, is that this is a kind of a Luciferian awakening kind of film.
Yeah, and you know, full disclaimer, I want people to understand, first of all, if you are uncomfortable with graphic nudity, and there is even child nudity that passes through this, if you are uncomfortable with the mutilation of animals and using actual animal corpses, if you are uncomfortable with actual animal sex on top of, I would say, imagery that you cannot prepare yourself for, perhaps this is not the film for you. There are plenty of gotcha moments. Now, beyond that, when I'm watching this, and again, because of the budget, because of the message, the first thing that I'm seeing, obviously, with Jodorowsky and his character, is this very apparent black and white symbolism. And if you look at not only some of the artwork from the original here, the all-seeing eye, which is really prevalent in his previous film, El Topo, which is also heavily is symbolized. Why do you think that he used that symbol in particular? And what do you think its prevalent meaning is? Because it does have a lot of importance in this movie. For instance, when you finally get all of the initiates that are ready to give up all of their possessions in all of these different fields, it is the eye that is symbolized that they burn all of their monetary possessions too.
Yes, good question. So the eye obviously has a lot of different meanings in different contexts. You know, it could mean something in a Christian context of the eye of providence. It could mean something from ancient Egypt, the Wayjot, which did involve human sacrifice, by the way. I mean, it could be Freemasonry. It could be some other secret society, Golden Dawn. I think what Jodorowsky is doing here is picking out prevalent occult and esoteric symbology and incorporating it into his own kind of mix, his own bag. So a lot of the secret societies are kind of schools for creating your own cult. This is, for example, Crowley's group was notorious for this, where a lot of the people that went up the ladder of that group just went on to create their own cult, like L. Ron Hubbard or Gerald Gardner with Wicca and other people as well. So what I think Jodorowsky's trying to do as the magus in the character, he's the magician. He's the one who's going to speak the new word for the aeon, which is what magicians are always trying to do, LARPing around, doing their magic thing. Here, this is his ritual working. This is his great work to speak the truth that he thinks is the sort of his grimoire, right? So magicians used to have a grimoire, a book of shadows, where they would write out all of their rituals and their symbols and things that they had learned from their dark arts. And so this is what's going on here, and that's why he's borrowing from so many different religious traditions, whether it's sort of ancient Vedic texts or whether it's Christian iconography, or whether it's Masonic or Golden Dawn. He sort of puts them all into a blender and just presents it not so much in a coherent, orderly, sequence by sequence chronological way, but more in like an allegorical, symbolic, visual presence way. So I think that that's what he's after, and that's why he's using the I, is that he's saying that this is the ultimate truth is what I think I'm saying here, is that religion, all of these different cults and secret societies are basically illusory. They're just like movies or stories. And like you said here, I view these initiates here as the people who at one time were just normal people who mastered their fields. They became the oligarchs and the monopoly capitalists of their fields. And then they wanted more. And so they went to the magician, to the magus. They went into these deeper mysteries. They wanted to find out what the big secret was. The big secret, he says, is that you have to go into the next phase, the death, burial, resurrection phase. And so then you have to give up all your possessions, have no attachments. So we have that Far Eastern idea. And that, he says, will lead you to the next stage of apotheosis, becoming your own God.
So let's talk about Jodorowsky in this film. And let's especially talk about the white and black symbolism, the Masonic left hand, right hand path that we see throughout. For instance, in the very beginning, obviously those are the two prevalent colors that we're working with, not only in the subjects, but in the background. You see an elaborate ritual, I don't know how else to say it, in the very beginning with a washcloth that is white as well, before he basically strips both of these women from their physical identities, their beauty, their vanity, and puts them together in a very occult pose. We then go into a montage of different symbolism, which the eye, again, is extremely prevalent. And then we're introduced into the Fool and Jesus character. So before we get to the Fool and that character, let's talk about that dynamic in the film that Jodorowsky presents throughout this journey.
Yeah, this is basic kind of Masonic black and white dialectic type stuff, where you've got the checkerboard, you've got Jachin and Boaz, which are the two pillars of the front of Solomon's temple, and they were given that name because they're supposed to, in esoteric symbology, they symbolize kind of the polar forces of black and white, night and day, good and evil. Everything in these traditions is usually seen as just manifestations of one force in two different ways. So evil is just the flip side of good, just as much as night is the flip side of day, right? So they're seen as kind of necessary forces. And that's the meaning of him being presented in the middle of the Jachin and Boaz, the two towers, the two pillars there, because that's, you are kind of going to be going into the temple. You're going to be going into the inner mysteries. This is your, as the viewer, initiatory experience, just like the as you said, the girls being ritually shorn and stripped. That's all part of initiatory process, right? It's getting, like you said, getting rid of that old identity. And we'll see that theme recur when the gods, or whoever they are, the elites, when they cast their plaster selves into the fire, right? That's representing like a cremation of care type of thing, like getting rid of all of your cares, your attachments, the ego self that you thought you were. So that's what this initial phase is setting us up for, is prepping us for the ritual to come in the film. And then, as you said, it's going to focus on this Jesus, and he's a fool / Jesus character. He's kind of both. An archetype. There's a lot of tarot type imagery in this as well, archetypes, and that's going to prepare us for the alchemist. So the initial sequence is going to be the alchemist attempting to produce the philosopher's stone. So
let's get into the Fool / Jesus type character, and I say that because even very early on, you see that he's put up in a crucifix-like position. He's stoned, and again, the tarot card is really that focal point, again, right after that montage that introduces us to this character. I watched the first hour of your analysis, and you pointed to the fact that this is his depiction of that esoteric Jesus, that Buddhist Jesus that has kind of been presented in that kind of Manly P. Hall world, right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And I mean, one guy was bitching in the comments, is this Jesus or the fool? And I'm saying, well, it can be both, right? I mean, from the Gnostic esoteric perspective, they would view Jesus as kind of a guy who figured out the tricks of the trade, so to speak, to either become a magus or a magician or a deity, an avatar, or he tricked everybody at least into thinking that he was, right? I'll give you an example of this. I'm sure you've probably seen that pretty famous Masonic movie, The Man Who Would Be King, with Sean Connery and Michael Caine, right? And what's the whole premise of that movie is that they're engaging in trickery to fool this simplistic tribe in the Himalayas that Sean Connery is actually the reincarnated Alexander the Great. And it works for a little while, right? So I think the reason that is a Masonic movie is that it's kind of trying to show you the trickery, the trickster, right, can fool people into thinking that he's a deity, or perhaps, if you read this literally in the transhumanist sense, one day achieve divinity in some sense. So I see it, yes, as, again, it's a combination of, that's, I think, what makes this film difficult, is that it's so many different religious traditions kind of poured into one and laid out in a sequence that you kind of have to read it in alchemical phases, right? And so alchemy has 4 stages to the process to produce the Philosopher's Stone. And but we're gonna begin with this fool, right? The fool archetype out of the tarot is the guy who just kind of bumbles his way along, but he stumbles into great truth and he stumbles into power and whatnot, in much the same way as the magus himself. And so the magus is supposed to kind of embody all the archetypes. But there's an element of the trickster and of the fool to the magus as well. So in the esoteric view of Jesus, you're going to have the magus instructing the fake Jesus, hippie Jesus character in terms of, how to ascend the holy mountain.
So now we've talked about some of the hermetic symbolism in this, the as above, so below stuff. We've talked about a lot of the esoteric stuff. What I want to talk about is some of the revelation of the method that you just alluded to in this film. The video that, I featured was one of the scenes that really stuck with me. And believe me, there are many a scene that are going to visually stick with you just out of the fact that it's shock value. Forget about the artistic nature of it. I mean, you're going to watch animals be killed, blown up. I mean, you're going to watch...
he's popping Pepe's, dude. He's like popping Pepe's little frogs blowing up.
When I saw that, I'm thinking to myself, man, not only did he have the money, but he got by on all this craziness.
He went and bought like 100 frogs to blow up. Yeah.
Frogs and lizard, like iguana, it's wild to watch. But the thing that stuck with me most was the scene where a gorging elite class that essentially, is represented almost as this Anglo-American culture, as most of these people are white. They have trophy wives. Their wives are basically worshiping their phallic symbols as money. They're all eating just like gross amounts of like food, and they don't care. They're gorging. And then a magician, literal magician, comes out and tells them how they will create a slave class that wants to be so subservient that they are willing to crawl into a small hole, not even open a coffin door, but a small hole into a coffin in which they will sleep and defecate and then go back to work. And this city of coffins reminded me so much of the Matrix and that city that it just never left me. So I went to make that point. That, to me, was probably the most profound revelation of the method moment in that film. Was there another moment in the film that was as much for you, or can you point to a couple that do kind of reveal these truths in society?
Yes, the sections of the different planetary gods, so to speak, was probably the most revelatory, and there's 2 of those that stand out, like you said. Definitely Pluto with the coffin apartments and the city of freedom, as he called it, which was just a trap to get you into the AI box, fake city. But there was also, I think it was the Saturn. Was it Saturn that had control of children through toys and pop culture and like literally training children to get ready for war.
And Jay, just to let the audience know that hasn't seen this, when you're talking about planets, you're actually talking about the initiates that are represented by these planetary bodies. Explain that really
So
quickly.
basically, you've got these, the planetary rulers seem to, in my interpretation, they seem to represent people who have mastered certain domains under which they might class these planetary influences. So, for example, Saturn, we think of time, Chronos, death. And so Saturn's going to be connected to anything related to war, warfare, this kind of stuff. And so Chronos trains children and even has an AI machine that will spit out algorithms about, how to track everybody and how to, it's basically a Google type of thing, which that was pretty wild. But also mind controlling children, electroshocking them to prepare them for war. That was crazy. Just as much as you said with Pluto, where you have Pluto basically being this austerity god who is married to this fat, well, I'm not going to use that word on YouTube, but they have a snake baby and they're calling up, they're bankers that loan out money, and they call up and they say, it's time to depopulate your country for austerity measures, blah, blah, blah. That was all very revelatory. And so, yes, they're humans who've mastered certain domains, warfare, pop culture, arts and sexuality, and here, quantity, money, banking, this kind of stuff. And so that was really revelatory, was both the Pluto, as you mentioned, the box city, and the mind control sort of training up children to be wards of the state.
So I guess, we've talked about a lot of aspects of this film. Again, it is hard to recommend. It's hard to look away when you start to see it. It's hard to really put together a coherent storyline if you're looking for something like this. And it's not a short film. It's just under 2 hours. I mean, this is there is a narrative there. There is a narrative, as chaotic as it seems, and aside from the ones that you discussed, I mean, there are those moments of truth, right? The factory where they have the people, where they're literally trying on chest plates and different parts of their arms. There's the commercialization of Christianity through the sale of these massive crosses. There are a lot of messages that do ring true, but we find that in the occult. And, I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I figured, I'd get you on the Holy Mountain, but I did a video earlier this week on Albert Pike, because they actually tore the Albert Pike statue down. Now, they did so because he was a Confederate and his association with the Klan. But as you know, being in this field, he was also a high-level Mason, and one of the reasons that people associate those high-level Masons with Luciferianism. So what is your take on Pike, morals and dogma, and what we're seeing now in the culture?
Well, morals and dogma is a philosophy. I think would be the best way to describe it. It's very similar to Manly P. Hall's book that you mentioned earlier, Secret Teaching of All Ages. Morals and dogma is kind of the Bible of Masonry that presents the lodge's philosophy, and it follows these degrees and whatnot, but it's a mix, as Pike himself says in the book very explicitly. It's a mix of all the religious philosophies of the world in his mind, right, into what is supposed to be kind of the overarching philosophy. There's a couple different groups that try to have these universal philosophies. There's the perennial school, the perennialists like Evola and Ganon. They try to have a version of it. And then there's the Freemasons, and they disagree with one another, supposedly. But they're all kind of aiming at creating a universal philosophy of religions. So in that regard, you could see how it would be very amenable to global elite groups. For example, I remember years ago, I was listening to the lecture series on YouTube of Manly P. Hall. And so you're listening to him talk about planets and influences and astrology and all this stuff for hours. And then he ends this whole lecture series by saying, and the point of all this is that we need a global government and everybody needs to submit to the UN. Literally, that's the last. So he was just leading you along this garden path to tell you that you need to submit to the United Nations. And that's what all this stuff means. That's why the United Nations promotes the same type of philosophy, the theosophy type stuff. And at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff's not that different. But Pike does say, and he is being it is accurate that he says that for Freemasonry, the philosophy is Luciferian in the sense that they see Lucifer as this bringer of enlightenment, a bringer of philosophy, bringer of truth, much in the way that Jodorowsky presents this book or this film as woke in that sense. I mean, I think Jodorowsky would be perfectly in line with what Pike writes in Morals and Dogma.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I brought him up. I thought there were a lot of different parallels there, and
Right.
That's a real world figure that again supersedes Jodorowsky. By the way, who's still alive? He's 91 years old, and if you don't know his history, I would definitely check that out. We talked about the connection to Hollywood, the Beatles. But, I mean, his influence in pop culture remains to this day. Lady Gaga clearly has ripped him off for years and years and years. And you're seeing more and more of that, people becoming hip to that. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of the promotion now of that subculture? Like, I'm going to be Illuminati, I'm going to be top of the star, Jay-Z, what? And then some of these people actually grow up looking into recent forms of esotericism?
Yeah, it's all the above. I mean, the Beatles definitely had a lot of influence behind them that wanted that kind of, transcendental meditation and the Eastern ideas to come over to the West, to influence the West. And if you look at, the cover of Sgt. Pepper's, you've got Crowley on the cover, you've got all these political figures and religious figures, and at the same time, you had on the cover of Rolling Stones, there's a bust that people think is Crowley on the cover of On Her Majesty's Satanic Request, right? So there was this weird era of 60s liberation, counterculture stuff that ironically had a lot of establishment support behind it. And if you've read Dave McGowan's book, that's pretty uncontroversial now that he's kind of exposed all that much of especially the Laurel Canyon scene was intentionally promoted by really wealthy, really powerful people. So I'm not saying everybody in the counterculture was co-opted. It doesn't work like that. It just kind of needs money kind of funneling into certain areas and certain people being promoted. That's all it takes. You don't have to have everybody being some kind of agent. But that's what's going on, I think, in the present day with a lot of these pop stars and a lot of these people. Some of them may be kind of seriously looking into this stuff, but it doesn't really matter because it kind of becomes like a symbiotic circle, a feedback loop where the conspiracy quote culture becomes mainstream, and then the mainstream people start mimicking it and using it. But I do think that some of them probably do take it pretty serious. Even some of the pop stars may take it serious. It's more than just marketing to some people.
I would say the ones that are taking it serious are doing it much more on the low or just going all out. I think there are those that are just exploiting it. But I think that, just like in the very beginning, when you started to see this seep into the culture more and more and more, I always thought, I grew up thinking, hey, Satanism is, that goth kid that didn't get laid in high school and he's angry and he found something. Not that there's deep, deep roots in bloodletting rituals of an oligarchical class that's been around and ruling for centuries. Not that, these type of artists are promoted by those same people. When you look at Salvador Dali, if you were going to watch something that's the closest thing to a movie of one of his paintings, I would argue that Jodorowsky's work is probably that. And he's there at those Rothschild parties. So, before we leave, I'd say, is there anything we missed that you think my audience should know about this film? By the way, there's an hour free on YouTube where you and your fiance decode this, and then a second hour that you can get via subscription service over at jaysanalysis.com. I want to encourage people to go support you there. Like I said, if there's anything you would leave my audience with that we missed, what would it be about this film?
Well, ultimately, I think they take the people into a shamanic approach. So you go through all these elaborate ceremonial rituals and alchemy, and then the magus tells the group that get rid of all your junk and strip down to your junk, and I'm going to put you through your final ritual of a shamanic kind of initiation where we're going to go to Peru or Bolivia or somewhere, and we're going to, eat the iboga or ayahuasca or whatever. And then you're going to go through this transformation. And then we're going to ascend the holy mountain, he says, the Magus tells this group. And we're going to unseat the 9 immortal men. And you're going to take their place and become the immortals, because this is the secret. We're going to ascend the holy mountain. And I guess I'll leave, my interpretation to those that want to subscribe. But yeah, you can kind of get, if you think of Jodorowsky as the atheist mystic, as he titles himself, you can guess where he will take his film, and you can guess the interpretation that I would give it, because for many of the elite, they would probably describe themselves as atheist, but that's not necessarily out of accord with Luciferianism, as many might find contradictory. There's actually concord there, because you were talking about elites being satanic, families being satanic. Well, that's kind of an outer, in my view, there's like an outer core of like, oh, well, what is, pop Satanism? That's your atheist, and everybody's just an animal, and I'm gonna, be cool and get, cheerleaders now or whatever for, orgies. But then it goes darker. There's more inner circles, right? As these concentric circles get closer to the middle or the top, and it gets darker, and it's more, stuff that you don't even really want to talk about, but stuff that's come out like Epstein and worse, right? This kind of stuff.
Well, absolutely. And you talked about planets earlier. If we're going to get as far deep as we want to on Lucifer, like you just said, hey, there are those that are the do as thou wilt, Crowley mentality of atheism, almost social Darwinism. Might is right. We've taken that accord, whether we like it or not, via our government powers in this country. That's the reality. But if you want to get into esotericism, if you want to get into, what people may really believe, you could talk about the dog star Sirius and its relationship to a real being of light, Lucifer, and that possibility that's been thrown around. That's what's bothered me the most after, growing up Christian, then, having that atheist phase. And I'd say out of everything, I'm agnostic at this point. I really don't believe that, when we die, it's over. But at the same time, I don't know that every religious writing out there is correct. I see, though, that there are those that present themselves as men of the Lord or Christians, and no, they're at these occultic encampments, Bohemian Grove in particular now, for over a century. And even if that's just a facade with, their great owl statue, well, before that it was a Buddha statue. And there were Druidic rituals. And there are encampments of the lost boys or fallen angels. These themes have been around now 4 centuries, and they are amongst the most powerful of people. And that's why I find this subject matter so interesting. Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. What's coming up? Where can people find you? And what should they be looking for?
Yeah, you could just go to Jay's Analysis, the website, if you want to support my work there. I have a subscription service where people get access to the archives, where I lecture. I basically just lecture on the books of the elite. That's kind of my main thing. And I cover movies too, but if you want to get what I say is a master's degree level education in the writings of the elite themselves, then that's what I do for you. So a lot of people don't have time to read Tragedy and Hope. Well, you can go listen to my lectures on it. So there's a subscription there, and then you can just follow me on Twitter or YouTube or wherever else that I'm allowed to be presently.
Yeah, man, we got to get together again, because with everything going on, you talked about Tragedy and Hope, and we talked about the Albert Pike statue, but we didn't talk about Cecil Rhodes and the fact that they're actually taking that down the right way over in Oxford, but in my opinion, for a lot of the wrong reasons. I get
the wrong reasons, exactly.
Yeah, I get it. He's a colonialist, he's an imperialist, but the big secret, and it's an open secret, is that he was an imperialist for the whole globe on behalf of a predator class, and he helped set up those round table infrastructures and foundation infrastructures and globalist infrastructures that ring true to this day and continue to oppress us. Jay, thank you so much.
Well, we're about to be under a bunch of technocrat colonialists. We're under data colonialists. That's what people are missing.
I don't even give them technocrat, man. It's a technopoly. They're on behalf of the predator class, and that's what they are, man. They are social climbing predators that do not care what the color of your skin is, what gender you identify with, as long as they are in control of you. They've consolidated power, and they have the infrastructure. Thank you so much, Jay. Again, we got to get back together sooner rather than later. Thanks for joining me, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right, Jay Dyer, everybody. Awesome interview. Remember to check me out over on, oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. Over on the GoFundMe. $5, $10, $15, big donors. It means the world to me. That's how we bring you great content like this and bring people in for their analysis as well. Without you guys, I couldn't do it. We're fully demonetized on this platform as harmful content. What you just heard was pretty harmful, right? We decoded a 1970s movie and related it to today. Go check out my Columbus Stays as Cuomo cancels Teddy the Trust Buster, and check out the mandatory vaccinations that you'll be required to have, including a flu shot, over at the University of Tennessee, and why that will be the new normal. So much more. My documentary films, they're free on this channel right now in the playlist section. Loose Change, Final Cut, Fabled Enemies. That's how you learn about 9/11. Invisible Empire, A New World Order to Find, and Shade the Motion Picture. Also free right here, right now. I would say Shade and Invisible Empire are so important and so relevant right now. You can also support me over on rockfin.com. Costs you nothing to follow me. If you want the premium content, you can endorse me, and then you get a ton of other content with it, not just mine. It's a pretty cool thing, and I'm over on Minds as well. Love you guys. See you on the flip side.